So I want to let you all in a big and important, not so secret that all pain scientists know, but most of the world misunderstands. My name is Dr. Rebecca Pillay-Riddell. I'm a clinical psychologist as well and a basic behavioral scientist who now dabbles in neuroscience, who has now studied thousands of babies and parents in painful situations during medical procedures. So as you heard, my lab at York University is known as the Opportunities to Understand Childhood Hurt Laboratory, or as we call it, the OUCH Lab. So the OUCH Lab has led the largest study in the world that actually studies parents and young kids during vaccinations over the first 5 years of life. So today my talk is going to focus really on 6 questions. What is pain? Why infants in pain have a right to be hella mad at adults for most of history? How we can listen better when babies speak about pain? Why we should be careful of letting others speak for babies? How a baby's pain expression may say as much about the caregiver as the baby, and what can caregivers do to help babies in pain? So pain gets a really bad rap because it hurts and hurting sucks. But short-term pain is really important because we in the biz call this short-term pain acute pain, but it ensures we stop doing stupid things that damage our body, like playing with fire, or encourage us to get rest when our body needs to heal. There are actually rare people out there who are insensitive to pain, and they often don't live past their 20s. Pain is an alarm system and integral to our survival. But pain is never just about the body. The experience of a painful event has to be made sense of through the brain. So let me be clear out there. If you had no brain, you would have no pain, because the experience of pain lives, and how your brain makes sense of that painful event, like the fire, in the context of your unique history, your unique body, your unique thoughts, and your unique social context. So painful experiences, like a vaccination needle, get processed through past pain experiences you had with needles, your emotions about needles, your reasoning about the value of getting needles, and how your body actually handles pain signals. Even who is in the room when you get that needle makes and impacts how you experience pain. These are all necessary pieces to understand the totality of pain. So this means that because we are not members of the Borg, and I am totally pandering, assuming there'll have to be at least one Trekkie out there, we have different brains, bodies, thoughts, and social experiences. So pain is always a unique experience. But through talking about pain and telling others about our pain, we have this shared understanding so we can help each other. Great, right? Actually, in my research area, this isn't so great, because the challenge is, what do you do about people who can't talk about their pain? This has been a massive problem in our history and for infants. So I feel like this is my little time machine, this old globe, to kind of take us back in history. But for most of recorded history, we did not believe babies felt pain. There were studies out there where scientists would poke babies with safety pins throughout their first months of life, trying to figure out exactly when they felt pain. There was a time in the not so recent past that health professionals would conduct open heart surgery on infants without any analgesic, that's pain blocking, or anesthetic, that's kind of all sensation blocking medication. They knew that when you cut open a baby, they would squirm, so they would use a paralytic drug, a drug that wouldn't allow the baby to move, but no pain medicine. Basically, until 1987, when there was a watershed article that kind of said, hey, listen, babies felt pain, this was our history and our past. We did not hear babies when they clearly told us that they were in pain. Things are better now, but these myths still float around whether we know it or not. So the next question I want to talk about is, how do we listen better to babies? So obviously babies don't speak. So how do scientists like myself actually measure pain in babies? Well, one of the first things we do is use behaviors. So their facial activity, their legs squirming, their consolability, how easy they're consoled, how much they cry. All of these are signs that tell us that a child is in distress. But how do you kind of tell that it's distress from I'm hungry versus distress from you poked me with a needle? Is context. So it's often these behaviors with context that help us to help health professionals and parents and caregivers tell us whether a baby is not in pain. And then the final way we kind of know when we are trying to study pain in babies is we ask a parent. This leads to the next challenge. We've got to be careful. And why should we be careful of letting others speak for babies? So what we found is that parent pain ratings can actually be predicted as much by their stress almost as by the baby's actual pain behaviors. So for some of you, and stats would say about 5 to 10% of you, and I've purposely kind of kept bringing this needle in and out, for that group of you, even just the sight of this needle will make you stressed and distressed. The more stressed you are, the less able you actually are to attend to another person like a child in pain. So we know now from doing the research that we've done, for over 2 decades now, that parents will tell us and health professionals will tell us, so like parents, nurses, physicians, the behaviors are the most important thing to making judgments of pain. Well, we did some studies in a lab to kind of see, is that really true? What we did is we put parents, nurses, and physicians in a room watching videos of infants from different ages, from all the way from 2 months to 18 months. What we didn't tell them is that we had actually behaviorally controlled those videos. So every baby, regardless of age, had the exact same amount of maximal pain response. But we wanted to see what would happen when we asked them to judge the pain in the infants. And what we found was pretty shocking. We found that despite the exact same amount of pain behaviors, we found that younger infants were actually rated systematically by all groups as having less pain than the 18-month-olds. We also found out that parents and nurses tended to actually give higher pain judgments. So remember, this was kind of experimentally controlled, but docs were more willing to medicate those children for pain. So we have to be careful that when we ask someone how much pain they think a child is in, what are they going to do about that pain? Because that's not necessarily directly linked to higher pain judgments. When we did the same study, but actually this time we just did it with parents and we videotaped babies. And so we had their objective pain behaviors that we used to quantify or to measure pain in these babies. And then we asked parents how much pain that child was in. And we did these fancy predictive models. What we found is that only 20% of the variance or of how much their pain judgment, 20% of their pain judgments was determined by the infant's actual pain behaviors. When the babies were a little older at 6 to 12 months, only 40% of the parents' pain ratings were actually based on the baby's pain behaviors. What else was predicting it? Things like, and this was mainly done with mothers, maternal psychopathology symptoms. So the more stressed or depressed they were, we found the higher their pain judgments. And this was sometimes predicting as much as the baby's pain behaviors themselves. So one of the other questions is that how a baby's pain expression may actually say more about the caregiver or as much about the caregiver as the baby. So in all these studies where we've watched thousands of babies and parents in these vaccination appointments, what we found is that we can actually see patterns in how the baby expresses their pain by parts of the parent's belief system. So, for example, we asked parents how much, and it's a questionnaire that kind of talks about their experiences in close relationships. And so we found parents who actually don't or tend to downplay the importance of close relationships. We saw a systematic difference in their babies that they actually expressed less pain. So what has been shown in the literature is that people who interact or babies that are interacting with parents who don't have that priority for close relationships, they actually may downplay their pain behaviors so that keeps the caregiver close to them, because they know that if they got too emotional, perhaps they learn, and maybe they're not processing it at that cognitive level. But what they're finding is that perhaps by downplaying their pain experience, and their pain expression, parents will stay closer. We also know that parents who have stressed pain expressions actually also have babies that express less pain. So we see this relationship that if parents are extra stressed and they're communicating that to their infant over time, older infants will actually express less pain. And so it's, again, thought to be that idea that a less stressed parent will have a higher probability of staying close and protecting them. So it's important when we realize that infant pain can't actually be just a matter of looking at the baby. We have to think about the caregiver and how the caregiver interacts with the child. So we know all this about how to assess pain, how to try and understand the baby in pain. What can caregivers do? And I think it's important to know that in the acute pain context, so thinking about, again, I'm going to bring the scary needle for one last time in here, what we can do during vaccinations. So medicines can help. So there are things called topical anesthetics, and so we like to call it a magic cream or a numbing cream with kids or parents. But topical anesthetics like EMLA can actually block the pain from the needle going and piercing the skin. And they're also good for tattoos. So another thing that you can do with medicines is make your own. So sugar water and a pacifier is also a fantastic way. So you mix basically some sugar and water, and then you use a syringe to pull that in, and you drop it into the baby's mouth, or you dip a pacifier in sugar water and give it to the child right before the vaccination needle, and that really significantly reduces distress. I focused a lot more on the non-medicinal ways, or what we call non-pharmacological ways. And it comes down to a really interesting thing. As a psychologist, we're always trying to focus on the positive of what we want parents to do or what we want caregivers to do, and not to do, and we don't really talk about what you shouldn't do. But what our research has shown when we looked over thousands of vaccination appointments is that the babies that had the least distress had parents that not only did a lot of good things, but they weren't doing bad things as well. So that idea that actually doing some bad behaviors can negate some of the good behaviors that I'm about to talk about. So what are some of these good things? We did a randomized control trial, so a really stringent experimental methodology where we tried a strategy called the ABCDs of pain management. So we took over all these, again, thousands of videos, we tried to look at what were the successful parents doing and tried to think about a quick algorithm. And so we did with the ABCDs. So the A is actually for the parent. Assess your own anxiety. Calm parents tend to have calmer babies. So the B is actually take a belly breath. It's often stressful for parents to have to face vaccinations and themselves. And if they didn't have pain management as a kid, oh, I lied, needle one more time. If they didn't have pain management when they were kids, chances are they have some anxiety or stress to needles. Only 5 to 10% actually have what we call a needle phobia. So taking a deep breath, relaxing yourself, getting your heartbeat down, especially with younger infants whose head and ear can be right up against your chest, that's a great thing to do. The C stands for actually 3 things: a calm, close cuddle. And so getting a child into a calm, close cuddle before their vaccination, breastfeeding is amazing to do before, during, and after vaccination. And what we feel is that it's the combination of this smell, it's the combination of being close to the mother, the warmth, and just having that proximity that really lowers distress both before, during, and after a vaccination. And this is actually where the fidget spinner comes in again. So using little toys or something to distract older infants, because we would never do that with a 2-month-old, for example, who really just need the calm, close cuddle when you're doing that. But distracting a baby when they're at the right moment to be distracted is a great way to reduce distress and get the child calm. So when is that right moment? What our research has shown is that infants, when they first get stressed, and we think we all do this, or when they have that needle, they close their eyes really tight. So trying to force them to open their eyes and just and get them from that what we call self-regulatory behavior, that almost innate self-regulatory behavior. Rather than do that, you wait. You hold the child in a calm, close cuddle, probably 30 seconds to 1 minute, our research is showing, and then you start to distract the child with something that as powerful as a fidget spinner. And you'll see that getting that child engaged will, after they have a moment to be able to, and I say a moment, but like 30 seconds to a minute, to just regulate and calm down in a calm, close cuddle, it works magic. What are some of the bad things? So we talked about it's great to do a lot of good things and not do these bad things. And I want to emphasize that what our research has shown is that these are not bad parents. These are just behaviors that some parents may not realize is suboptimal. So criticizing a child, for example, when they've just had a vaccination, and also saying, okay, that's enough. That's enough crying for that needle. Trying to scare the child into forgetting about the pain. So they don't mean to do it, but we've seen parents who, right after the needle happens, they try and throw their child up to distract them in a way. But getting that lack of proximity actually scares the child. That's not helpful. And then one of the most surprising findings that has been consistently found in at least a dozen labs around the world, and ours is no exception, is that telling a baby or telling a young child that it's going to be okay, which we call verbal reassurance, telling them it's going to be okay actually increases distress. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. When things are really good and things are going well, no one has to reassure you to say that things are okay. The only time when people, and babies are very sensitive to this, and young children and older children as well, the only time that people say that things are going to be okay is actually when they think it may not be okay, or you may not think it's okay. So we also find that parents who say that repetitively, because it's all about how much they're doing it, saying it's okay once or twice is not a problem. But what we find is that parents who are saying it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, are actually not trying other strategies to calm their child down. So I think those are some of the factors that contribute to why verbal reassurance is actually one of those things we don't want you to do with children. So hopefully I've taken you through some six questions that kind of have summarized over 20 minutes of 20 years of research in about 10 minutes. And if you want to ask any more questions, please feel free, drop it in the chat. And feel free to follow me on Twitter at Dr. Becca PR. I'd love to interact directly that way as well. Thank you. Genetic component to pain. There was a study that was done by a Canadian about, I guess it was like probably 10 years ago, that redheads have lower thresholds for pain. I don't know if you've seen that, but it was this genetic kind of loading to it. So there's absolutely a genetic component to pain thresholds, as most things have some sort of genetic component. However, there's a lot more to it as well. So I think it's like most things I feel in behavioral sciences, is that there's a combination of nature and nurture involved with pain thresholds. So we don't think it's distraction. I think that glucose, sucrose has an effect on pain systems of the body. So we think that there's that. We also note that there's, with a pacifier, it tends to be even more powerful, like the role of sucrose on that when you put a pacifier. So there's almost an oral gustatory, so we call it like the mouth, the sucking, can actually probably send competing messages, muscle messages to the brain. And so we find that gate control theory, which is kind of the theory of pain, shows that the brain can only process so much at once, right? It's like a computer when you have too many windows open. And so sometimes when you open different, more windows of your body, so touching here, putting cold, heat, massage, sucking, that can help interfere with the pain signals. And so kind of close that gate to pain. I think it was reading studies. So I was interested, I was always needed, I was one of those people who debated between kind of doing the MD route and being a health psychologist, a pediatric psychologist. I ended up realizing that putting people under the microscope was kind of just way more what I wanted to do. And then I didn't really know a lot about pediatric pain when I chose to go to UBC to work under my supervisor, whom I adore, Dr. Ken Craig. And but what ended up happening, and I think has made me passionate, because obviously I have this full-time gig as Associate Vice President Research, but what keeps my lab going and my passion going was actually those studies that I started reading about from the 50s and the 60s, where because these myths and misconceptions about infants not being able to remember pain, that infants weren't capable of experiencing pain, that they didn't actually have the cortical development to process pain, all of these are myths. Even the fact that they can't remember pain is a myth. That still perpetuates to this day. I think it's just a misunderstanding of what memory it would use, what's the declarative memory system. So infants don't speak, so they wouldn't use the declarative memory system. That's not how they would encode the memory. So the idea that they can't speak is not that they can't experience the pain. We've watched how babies, the older babies, prenatal actually anticipate the needle. They know that this is coming and that they at a time, and they don't want it. And so you see this learning occurring, and that's how they show us, rather than telling us about a specific memory. So I think that the idea that infants are so vulnerable to pain, and that there's still so much pain going on, and it's such a challenge. It keeps me engaged. It got me hooked. The idea, like, again, having no background, I don't think I didn't need a PhD. That's sure as hell I didn't need a PhD to think an infant felt pain. But I think it was also real thinking that, oh, well, pain didn't have implications. And so we know all of that to not be true. So I don't know specifically, to be honest, about their pain response. I know there's been research out west by Tim Oberlander about the role of antidepressants, which is a little different, or it takes it in a different direction, and that can actually impact pain responding. I think that the uterine environment is impacted by cortisol and stress, and so the idea that that shapes neuroprogramming, I absolutely believe that. I don't think there's been a lot of research looking at anxious mothers, children of, I don't think there's been any studies, to be honest, looking at children of anxious mothers and their pain response during vaccination, per se. But we definitely find that postnatally, anxious mothers and that distress definitely gets communicated to the child, as we would expect. And so we see parents who have higher stress, not only having higher pain ratings for their child, but also having children with higher pain. Yeah, so I think that Canada is actually a hotbed of activity for pediatric pain research. Believe it or not, like it's kind of a mind-blowing to me. I grew up in this field, but the idea, it's actually one of the top research clusters in the country. Of all the different research fields, there's that many of us out there in Canada. And so there actually has been quite a bit of work. I've worked with collaborators at U of T, for example, Dr. Anna Taddeo, Dr. Christine Chambers on the East Coast, and we with a lot of knowledge mobilization. So Kids in the ACT Kids in Pain is actually a solution for kids in pain initiative by Dr. Christine Chambers, and so she's really focused on mobilizing all of this research. So we do hope that there's one of our posters somewhere in there. And we also, I think what has been really cool about our group, led by Anna Taddeo at U of T, we've actually informed the World Health Organization practices for vaccination in children. So this is kind of work led by Canadian scientists, and female Canadian scientists, might I add, who were all really working hard with these larger scale studies, with randomized controlled trials, trying to figure out the best ways to manage pain in infants. So definitely one of the things I'm working on, I've tried to give, I gave a talk last week, especially with this vaccination season, I'm really looking for all opportunities we can take to talk about pain management in these kids, because you don't want parents who don't like needles themselves to not take up the COVID-19 vaccine when it becomes available. You need 2 needles, I think, is what they're thinking, is that there's going to actually be a dual series on that. And so the idea of bringing babies in twice and making sure that we can do this and avoid needless pain. Parents are very powerful. That's kind of my mode, is that my hashtag parents are powerful. So yeah, absolutely. I think that question gets asked at most public talks I give. So I want to state that you should always acknowledge a child's pain. So but how we acknowledge it is different. So when a child bumps their knee and you assess the situation and they see like they scrape on the playground, you elevating your tone and your fear will actually, they will what we call socially reference. So it's a phenomenon where children, young children in particular, look to an adult or a primary caregiver to make sense of the situation for them. And so what you want to do, particularly at all times actually with children, controlling our own anxiety will always help the situation. It also helps us as parents cope when we have our frontal lobe engaged. And when we're highly stressed or really anxious, that shuts off our frontal lobe and our higher level functioning to cope. So when you see the child at the playground, what should you do? Acknowledge and then act. And so the idea to just kind of calmly say, are you okay? As you walk towards the child. I've always asked my kid, do you need a snuggle? And they'll look at me and kind of be like, and I'll always know by whether or not they want to come in or not. But rather than overwhelming them and assuming that this has been a really big experience, I always acknowledge my child in pain. I always recommend the clinical psychologist to acknowledge a child in pain. And don't try and, I think another thing that parents will try and do is like, it's not so bad. Let them tell you that, right? And so it's about following the child's lead. And so you can probably assess that it isn't, but sometimes, and again, you cannot separate the social, the emotional, the physical aspects of pain. They call it the biopsychosocial approach. You can't take out dimensions. So the idea that there's a small pain, but that could be coupled with fear can exacerbate the physical experience of that pain, of that event. So I think keeping calm, acknowledging at all times, and then giving them the choice. Do you need a snuggle? Do you need, because with young children, and I'm really focusing on the 0 to 5, which is where my research goes, it's really about acknowledging and asking them, do you want some proximity, like bringing the child in, which should be parents' responses to children in distress, situations like pain or fear, things like that. So there are two places. One that I think the best place to go is if you Google about kids' health or Sick Kids Pain Hub. So our lab has collaborated with the Pain Center at the Hospital for Sick Children. So I've created with a team of experts and I don't know if I can share a screen and show it, but if you, or maybe Samantha, I don't know if you can Google Sick Kids Pain Hub. And what you'll see is that we have handouts that are developmentally appropriate. So we created them for infants and toddlers, for preschoolers, for school age, and for teens, for both acute and chronic pain. So there are 8 different parent-friendly, family-friendly handouts that you can go. So just Google Pain Hub and Sick Kids, and you should get there. And then you just have to click your way through, and it has a handy little PDF button in the corner when you get to About Kids Health website that will allow you to actually print them out and distribute them. So we do that so that all parents can have access. And then we have another one that we're just working on for the Canadian Psychological Association that should be coming out next month. But I think that the ones that we did for About Kids Health really focus on both. We call them the 3 Ps actually. So the physical, the pharmacological, and the non-pharmacological, the psychological. So About Kids Health, it's on the About Kids Health website. But if you Google Pain Hub and Sick Kids, you should get there.